The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare International Airport buzzed overhead as thousands of travelers shuffled through the early morning chaos. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the security checkpoint at Terminal 3 was already packed with bleary-eyed passengers clutching their boarding passes and coffee cups. Among them stood a woman who would soon become the center of the most dramatic scene this airport had witnessed in months. Her name was Patricia Whitmore, though everyone who would come to know her story would simply call her Karen. She wore designer sunglasses despite being indoors, a cream-colored pantsuit that screamed expensive taste, and carried 2 large rolling suitcases plus an oversized designer handbag. But it wasn't her appearance that would make her infamous. It was what she was hiding, and the desperate, calculated scheme she was about to attempt. Patricia had planned this trip down to the last detail. 3 weeks of preparation. Countless hours researching TSA regulations, weight limits, and screening procedures. She'd even practiced her facial expressions in the mirror, perfecting the look of innocent confusion she would need if things went sideways. Inside her checked luggage and carry-on bags were 12 shampoo bottles. To any casual observer, they appeared perfectly normal, half-used bottles of high-end salon brands nestled among her clothes and toiletries. But Patricia knew the truth. Each bottle had been carefully emptied, cleaned, and refilled with something far more valuable than hair products. Melted gold, nearly $40,000 worth of pure, 24-karat gold that she'd carefully liquefied and poured into those innocent-looking containers. She'd let it cool and solidify, then topped each bottle with just enough actual shampoo to pass a visual inspection. The weight was her biggest concern, but she'd distributed it carefully across multiple bags, staying just under the limits that might trigger additional scrutiny. As she stood in the security line, Patricia's heart hammered against her ribcage, but her face remained a mask of bored indifference. She'd seen other passengers get pulled aside for random checks. She'd watched TSA agents swab bags and send items through the scanner multiple times, but she had confidence. She'd done her homework. Gold didn't show up dramatically different from liquids on an X-ray scanner. The bottles were regulation size. And if anyone asked, she had her story prepared about why she traveled with so many hair products. Dry scalp, sensitive skin, a dermatologist's recommendation. She'd rehearsed it until it sounded natural, even adding a slight embarrassed laugh when she delivered the punchline. Behind her in line stood Marcus Chen, a software engineer heading home to San Francisco after a business conference. He'd noticed Patricia immediately, not because of her appearance, but because of how she kept checking her phone and glancing toward the security checkpoint with barely concealed anxiety. Marcus had been traveling for work for 15 years. He knew what nervous looked like, and this woman was practically vibrating with tension. She kept adjusting her bags, repositioning them, touching her purse, running her fingers through her hair. Classic signs of someone carrying something they shouldn't be. Marcus didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she had liquids over the limit, or forgot to take out her laptop, but something about her energy felt different. More calculated, more desperate. The line crawled forward with painful slowness. Patricia maintained her composure, scrolling through her phone with apparent casualness, but her mind was racing. She mentally reviewed her backup plan. If the bottles got flagged, she'd act shocked, maybe even slightly offended. She'd insist they were just expensive salon products. She'd name-drop her hairstylist in Beverly Hills. She'd mention her dermatologist. If they really pressed, if they opened a bottle and discovered the truth, she had $3,000 in cash tucked into a hidden pocket of her purse. Money that could make problems disappear. Money that could convince a TSA agent to look the other way, to classify it as a misunderstanding, to let her repack and move on. She'd heard stories of it working before. Not often, but sometimes. Sometimes people could be bought. Sometimes desperation met opportunity, and rules became flexible. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The morning rush intensified. Families with screaming toddlers, business travelers typing frantically on phones, elderly couples moving slowly and carefully, all of them unaware of the drama brewing just a few feet away. Patricia finally reached the document check station. She handed over her driver's license and boarding pass with a practiced smile, the kind that suggested she did this every week, that she was a seasoned traveler who knew the routine. The TSA agent barely glanced at her, already waving the next person forward before Patricia had even collected her documents. First checkpoint cleared. Now came the hard part. Patricia approached the conveyor belt with deliberate calm. She'd watched dozens of people ahead of her go through the motions. Shoes off, electronics out, liquids in a clear bag, except her liquids weren't going in any clear bag. They were buried deep in her checked luggage and carefully positioned in her carry-on between layers of clothes. She lifted her bags onto the belt, watching them disappear into the scanner's maw. Her carry-on went through, then her personal item. She stepped into the body scanner, raised her arms, held her breath. The machine beeped. She stepped out. A female TSA agent gave her a quick pat-down. Nothing unusual. Patricia began to breathe easier. Maybe this would actually work. But then she heard it. The sound that made her blood run cold. One of the TSA agents monitoring the X-ray screen called out to his supervisor. "Hey Mike, can you take a look at this?" Patricia's stomach dropped. She watched as a second agent leaned over the monitor, studying something. Her carry-on bag sat frozen on the screen, its contents displayed in orange and blue shadows. The supervisor frowned, zoomed in, tilted his head. Patricia felt sweat begin to form along her hairline despite the airport's aggressive air conditioning. She forced herself to maintain eye contact with the female agent who'd patted her down, even managing a small smile as if to say, "Can you believe how long this always takes?" The supervisor pressed a button, sending her carry-on bag back through the scanner for a second pass. Then a third. Patricia's pulse thundered in her ears. This was it. The moment she'd feared and planned for. The male TSA agent, whose name tag read Michael Stevens, finally looked up from the monitor and made eye contact with her. His face was unreadable, professional neutrality perfected over years of dealing with every kind of traveler. "Ma'am, is this your bag?" He pointed to her carry-on, now sitting in a gray bin at the end of the conveyor belt. Patricia nodded, keeping her expression curious but unconcerned. "Yes, that's mine." "Is there a problem?" Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. "We need to do a manual inspection." "Can you step over here, please?" He gestured to a stainless steel table off to the side, away from the main flow of passengers. Patricia felt dozens of eyes turned toward her. The businessman behind her in line, Marcus, watched with open interest now. Other travelers glanced over, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed judgment, assuming she'd made some rookie mistake like bringing a full water bottle. Patricia wheeled her larger suitcase over to the inspection table, her mind already shifting to Plan B. She'd act cooperative. Friendly but slightly confused. She'd let them find the bottles. She'd express shock. And then, when the moment was right, when she could get one of them alone or distracted, she'd make her offer. Michael unzipped her carry-on with practiced efficiency. He began removing items methodically. Clothes, a tablet, chargers, a makeup bag. And then, nestled in a side pocket wrapped in a soft sweater, he pulled out 3 bottles of shampoo. They were premium brands, the kind sold in high-end salons for $40 a bottle. Michael held one up to the light, squinting at it. "These are over the liquid limit," he said flatly. Patricia immediately launched into her prepared response, her voice carrying just the right note of apologetic embarrassment. "Oh my goodness, are they? I'm so sorry. My dermatologist recommended this specific shampoo for my scalp condition, and I didn't realize. I usually check these bags, but I thought since they were partially used it would be okay. Is there any way I can keep them? I have a prescription if you need to see it." She was good. Even Marcus, watching from 20 feet away as he collected his own bags from the scanner, had to admit she was convincing. Her body language, her tone, her facial expressions, everything about her performance screamed innocent mistake, rather than calculated smuggling. But Michael had been doing this job for 12 years. He'd seen thousands of people try to sneak things through security. Some were nervous amateurs, some were professional smugglers, and some, like this woman, were somewhere in between. Something about the weight of the bottles bothered him. They felt too heavy. Shampoo, even expensive shampoo, had a certain density. These bottles felt different, heavier, more substantial. He set them aside and continued searching her bag. 2 more bottles. Then, in her checked luggage, which had also been flagged, he found 7 additional bottles of various hair products. All different brands, all expensive looking, all feeling slightly off. Michael glanced at his supervisor, who had walked over to observe. The supervisor, a 20-year TSA veteran named Sarah Martinez, picked up one of the bottles and gave it a shake. The liquid inside moved strangely, too slowly, too thick. Sarah unscrewed the cap and squeezed. A small amount of shampoo came out, but beneath it, The contents didn't move like liquid should. Her eyes met Michael's. They both knew. This wasn't shampoo. This was something else. Patricia watched this exchange with growing panic. She'd expected them to confiscate the bottles. She'd even prepared herself for some questions. But the way they were looking at the contents, the way they were communicating silently with their eyes, told her they suspected the truth. She needed to act fast. She cleared her throat, pitching her voice higher, more anxious. "Is everything okay? I really need to catch my flight. It leaves in 40 minutes. Michael didn't respond. Instead, he radioed for additional support. "Code 7 at checkpoint 3. Need a supervisor and possibly CBP. CBP. Customs and Border Protection." Patricia's heart sank. They weren't just confiscating her bottles. They were investigating. Within 2 minutes, 2 more officials arrived. A senior TSA supervisor and a CBP agent named Thomas Wright, a man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. The small inspection table area suddenly felt very crowded. Other passengers were being redirected to other lanes, and a fabric barrier was being set up to block the view, though several people, including Marcus, had lingered to watch, pretending to reorganize their bags or check their phones. Thomas picked up one of the bottles and examined it carefully. He'd seen gold smuggled in every conceivable way during his career. In statues, in electronics, in fake pregnancy bellies, and yes, in liquid containers. The weight, the unusual consistency, the fact that this woman was carrying 12 bottles of identical density, it all added up. He looked at Patricia with a level gaze. "Ma'am, we're going to need to test these contents. We have reason to believe these bottles contain something other than hair products." Patricia's mask slipped. Just for a second, her eyes widened with genuine fear before she regained control. "That's ridiculous. They're just shampoo bottles. This is harassment. I want to speak to your supervisor. I want to file a complaint. I'm going to miss my flight because you're wasting time on bottles of shampoo." Her voice rose, attracting more attention despite the barriers. It was a calculated move. Create a scene. Make them uncomfortable. Force them to either let her go or explain their suspicions publicly. But Thomas Wright didn't flinch. He'd dealt with this tactic countless times. "Ma'am, if you're confident these are just hair products, then you have nothing to worry about. We'll test them, confirm they're shampoo, and you'll be on your way. We can do this quickly." He gestured toward a private screening room just off the main checkpoint area. "If you'll come with me." It wasn't a request. Patricia looked around, searching for an escape route, an argument, anything. She saw other travelers watching, some with phones out, possibly recording. She saw TSA agents blocking the exits. She saw Michael and Sarah carefully gathering all 12 bottles into evidence bags. Her carefully constructed plan was collapsing, but she still had one card left to play. The money. If she could just get one of them alone. If she could make the offer in the right way. Maybe she could still salvage this. She followed Thomas into the screening room, her mind racing. The room was small, clinical, with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. Of course there was a camera. Patricia sat down, trying to appear calm, trying to think. Thomas set 3 of the bottles on the table between them. "Let's start simple," he said, his tone conversational but firm. "Why are you traveling with so much hair product?" Patricia launched into her story again, more animated this time, adding details about her sensitive scalp, her exclusive salon in Beverly Hills, how she couldn't use regular products, how her dermatologist had been treating her for years. She even pulled out her phone, offering to show him her appointment history. Thomas listened patiently, his expression neutral, occasionally nodding. When she finished, he simply said, "And these products cost how much?" Patricia hesitated. "About $40 per bottle, maybe a bit more." Thomas did the math out loud. "So you're traveling with approximately $500 worth of shampoo. That's a significant investment." Patricia nodded eagerly. "Yes, exactly. That's why I was so careful to pack them. They're very expensive, and I need them for my condition." Thomas picked up one of the bottles again, weighing it in his hand. "The thing is, ma'am, we've tested hundreds of thousands of liquid containers. We know how much shampoo weighs. In these bottles, they weigh approximately 3 times what they should. So I'm going to ask you one more time. What's actually in these bottles?" The room felt like it was shrinking. Patricia could feel the walls closing in. Outside, she knew. Other agents were probably opening the other bottles, testing the contents, building their case. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before this became official, before charges were filed, before this turned from a suspicious inspection into an arrest. She leaned forward, lowering her voice, trying to create a sense of intimacy, of conspiracy. Look, I can see you're a reasonable man. You've probably been doing this job for a long time, dealing with difficult passengers, working long hours for not enough pay. I understand, and I appreciate you trying to do your job, but I think we both know this is all a big misunderstanding. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching Thomas's face for any sign of interest, of weakness. She saw nothing, but she pressed on anyway. I have a proposal, a way we can both walk away from this happy. I have resources. I'm a successful businesswoman, and I understand that sometimes situations like this can be resolved quietly. I'm prepared to make a substantial donation, let's call it, to your retirement fund. $3,000, cash, right now. And in exchange, we forget about all this. You tell your colleagues it was just a false alarm, and I catch my flight. Nobody gets hurt. Nobody has to file paperwork. We both go home happy. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's heart pounded as she watched Thomas's face. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stared at her with those cold, experienced eyes. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair and pressed a button on a device Patricia hadn't noticed before. A small recording device. Just to be clear, ma'am, you're offering me a $3,000 bribe to ignore evidence of smuggling and falsify my report? His voice was deadly calm. Patricia's face went white. The recording device. The camera in the corner. She'd just confessed everything on tape. She tried to backtrack immediately, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. No, that's not what I meant. I was trying to, you misunderstood me. I wasn't offering a bribe. I was just saying hypothetically, Thomas held up a hand, cutting her off. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You've just admitted to attempting to bribe a federal officer, which is a federal crime. We're also going to test these bottles, and I'm confident we're going to find they contain gold, or another valuable material that you are attempting to smuggle without declaring. That's another federal crime. I need you to stay here while I get back up. He stood and walked to the door, opening it to reveal 2 more CBP agents waiting outside. They entered the room, flanking Patricia, who had started crying. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and frustration. Her perfect plan, weeks of preparation, all destroyed in one moment of desperation. Outside the screening room, in the main checkpoint area, news of the situation was spreading among the TSA agents. Michael and Sarah had successfully opened one of the bottles in a secure testing area. Inside, beneath a thin layer of actual shampoo, was a solid mass of gold. It had been melted, poured into the bottle, and allowed to cool, creating a heavy ingot, perfectly shaped to the bottle's interior. They'd weighed it, approximately 3 pounds of pure gold per bottle, 12 bottles total, 36 pounds of gold. At current market prices, nearly $40,000. Sarah radioed Thomas with the results. He nodded grimly and turned back to Patricia. We've confirmed the contents. You're under arrest for smuggling, failure to declare monetary instruments, and attempted bribery of a federal officer. Do you understand these charges? Patricia didn't respond. She just sat there, makeup starting to run from her tears, her cream-colored pantsuit suddenly looking less elegant and more like a costume for a role she'd failed to play. Meanwhile, out in the main terminal, Marcus Chen was finally collecting his bags, but not before overhearing 2 TSA agents discussing the bust, golden shampoo bottles, an attempted bribe, the biggest seizure they'd seen in months. He shook his head in amazement. He'd known something was off about that woman. The nervous energy, the fake confidence. It was all so clear in retrospect. As airport police arrived to formally take Patricia into custody, more details of her plan emerged. During the questioning that followed, she eventually admitted everything, her lawyer advising cooperation in hopes of a reduced sentence. She'd inherited a significant amount of gold jewelry from her mother's estate. Rather than declare it and pay the appropriate taxes and duties, she'd decided to smuggle it to her sister in Los Angeles, where they planned to sell it privately and split the profits. She'd spent weeks researching methods, finally settling on the shampoo bottle technique after reading about it on a smuggling forum. She'd practiced the melting process, perfecting the temperature and timing so the gold would solidify properly without damaging the bottles. She'd created fake receipts for the hair products in case anyone asked. She'd even gone to a real dermatologist and gotten a prescription for medicated shampoo to add legitimacy to her cover story. But she'd made crucial mistakes. She'd underestimated how well-trained TSA agents were at detecting weight inconsistencies. She'd overestimated her ability to act casual under pressure. And most critically, she'd assumed that federal agents could be bought. That offering money would be seen as a solution rather than a crime. That $3,000 would matter more than their integrity. It was a miscalculation that would cost her everything. The charges she faced were serious. Smuggling could carry up to 10 years in prison. Bribing a federal officer could add another 15. Even with a plea deal, she was looking at years behind bars and hundreds of thousands in fines. All for gold she already legally owned, that she simply didn't want to declare properly. The arrest took less than 20 minutes once backup arrived. Patricia was handcuffed and escorted through a back corridor, away from the public checkpoints, but not before dozens of travelers had seen her being led away, her expensive luggage confiscated as evidence, her face a mask of shock and defeat. Social media posts started appearing almost immediately. Passengers who'd witnessed the commotion posted about the drama, some even capturing video of the inspection area and the barriers being set up. Within hours, the story would be picked up by local news. Woman arrested at O'Hare, attempting to smuggle gold and shampoo bottles, the headlines would read. Patricia's mugshot would be shared thousands of times. Her family would have to explain to friends and neighbors. Her professional reputation would be destroyed. Back at the checkpoint, the morning rush continued. Travelers who'd been delayed by the incident shuffled through, some complaining about the wait, others thrilled to have witnessed real airport drama. The TSA agents returned to their positions, already processing the next wave of passengers. For them, it was just another day. Another smuggler caught. Another reminder of why they checked every bag, every bottle, every traveler, no matter how well-dressed or confident they appeared. Michael returned to his X-ray monitor, Sarah to her position checking IDs. Thomas Wright returned to his office to begin the extensive paperwork that would document every detail of the arrest. And somewhere in a secure evidence room, 12 shampoo bottles filled with gold sat waiting to be officially weighed, tested, and logged. The consequences for Patricia extended far beyond her arrest. Because she'd attempted to bribe a federal officer, prosecutors used that to argue she'd shown a pattern of disregard for the law, eliminating any possibility of a lenient sentence. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd panicked, that the bribe offer was a moment of desperation rather than premeditation. But the recording was damning. Her words were clear. Her intent was obvious. She'd explicitly offered money in exchange for looking the other way. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. During her trial months later, the prosecution painted a picture of a calculating criminal who'd spent weeks planning an elaborate smuggling operation, then attempted to corrupt a federal agent when caught. They presented the melted gold, the fake receipts, the forum posts she'd researched, her practice runs melting gold at home. It was systematic, deliberate, sophisticated. The defense tried to argue that Patricia was a grieving daughter who'd made poor decisions while dealing with her mother's death, that the gold had sentimental value, that she'd never intended to break the law. But the evidence overwhelmed any sympathy the jury might have felt. 12 bottles, $40,000, weeks of planning, an attempted bribe. These weren't the actions of someone who'd made an impulsive mistake. These were the actions of someone who'd deliberately chosen to circumvent the law because she felt entitled to, because she thought she was smarter than the system, because she believed rules applied to other people but not to her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Patricia. Whitmore was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay over $60,000 in fines and restitution. The gold was forfeited to the government. Her sister, who'd been waiting in Los Angeles to receive the smuggled goods, was questioned but ultimately not charged due to lack of evidence showing prior knowledge. Patricia's house had to be sold to cover legal fees. Her car was repossessed. Her reputation in her community was destroyed. Friends stopped calling. Her social media accounts, once filled with photos of luxurious vacations and expensive dinners, were deleted after being flooded with negative comments. Everything she'd built, her image of success and sophistication, crumbled because she'd decided that saving a few $1,000s in taxes was worth risking everything. Thomas Wright, the CBP agent who'd conducted the interview, would later tell colleagues that the bribe attempt was what made the case memorable. He'd caught smugglers before, dozens of them, but the brazenness of offering cash right there in the screening room, being recorded, with a camera watching, showed a level of desperation and entitlement he rarely encountered. Patricia had been so confident in her plan, so sure that money solved problems, that she'd assumed everyone had a price. She'd learned the hard way that integrity couldn't be bought, at least not from the agents working that day at O'Hare, and certainly not for $3,000. The story spread through TSA and CBP networks as a training example. Photos of the shampoo bottles with their hidden gold cores were used in presentations about smuggling techniques. Patricia's case was cited in briefings about the importance of trusting instincts when something felt wrong. Michael Stevens, the agent who'd first noticed the unusual weight, received a commendation. Sarah Martinez, who'd tested the consistency of the liquid, was praised for her thoroughness. The entire team at Terminal 3 that morning received recognition for their professionalism and attention to detail. They'd done their jobs exactly as they were trained to do, and they'd caught a criminal in the act. For the thousands of innocent travelers who passed through O'Hare that day, most never knew about the drama that had unfolded just feet away. They collected their bags, caught their flights, went about their business. But for those who'd witnessed it, who'd seen Patricia being questioned, who'd watched the agents carefully bagging evidence, who'd noticed the police escort, it became a story they'd tell for years. The woman in the expensive pantsuit who thought she could outsmart airport security, the Karen who tried to bribe her way out of trouble, the smuggler who got exactly what she deserved. And for Marcus Chen, the software engineer who'd noticed Patricia's nervous behavior from the beginning, it became a reminder that sometimes your instincts are right. Sometimes the person acting suspicious really is hiding something. Sometimes karma comes swiftly and completely. The 12 shampoo bottles, once carefully prepared hiding spots for illegal gold, now sit in an evidence locker somewhere in Chicago, a testament to one woman's greed and arrogance. Patricia Whitmore's name is forever associated with airport security failures, not because the system failed, but because it worked exactly as designed. The agents were trained, vigilant, and incorruptible. The technology detected anomalies, the procedures were followed, and justice was served. Her story serves as a warning to anyone else who might consider similar schemes. The TSA screens millions of passengers every year. They've seen every trick, every technique, every hiding spot you can imagine. They know how much things should weigh. They know how liquids behave. They know when something isn't quite right, and they cannot be bought. In the end, Patricia's attempt to save a relatively small amount in taxes and duties cost her years of freedom, tens of thousands of dollars, her reputation, and her future. She'd entered O'Hare that morning wearing designer clothes and carrying expensive luggage, projecting an image of success and sophistication. She left in handcuffs, wearing the same cream-colored pantsuit now wrinkled and stained with tears, her carefully constructed facade shattered forever. The gold she'd tried so desperately to smuggle was worth about $40,000. Her legal fees, fines, and restitution totaled over $60,000. She'd lost money on the entire venture, not to mention 4 years of her life. All because she'd believed she was entitled to bend the rules. All because she'd thought she was smarter than the system. All because she'd tried to hide her illegal scheme in plain sight, literally wrapped in layers of clothes and fake normalcy. The morning rush at O'Hare Terminal 3 continued long after Patricia was gone. Thousands more passengers shuffled through security checkpoints, most of them honest travelers with nothing to hide. They removed their shoes, pulled out their laptops, placed their bags on conveyor belts, walked through scanners, and went on their way without incident. Because that's how the system works when you follow the rules. It's efficient, straightforward, and gets you to your destination safely and legally. Patricia had a choice that morning. She could have declared the gold, paid the required duties, and walked through security without any problems. It would have cost her money, yes, but it would have been legal, simple, and stress-free. Instead, she chose deception. She chose to spend weeks planning an elaborate smuggling operation. She chose to hide valuable materials and lie to federal agents. And when caught, she chose to compound her crimes by attempting bribery. Every choice led her deeper into trouble, until there was no way out except arrest and imprisonment. Her story is a cautionary tale about entitlement, about the belief that rules apply to everyone except you, about the arrogance that comes from privilege and the assumption that money can solve any problem. Patricia thought her expensive clothes, her confident demeanor, and her prepared cover story would be enough. She thought that if caught, a few $1,000s would make the problem disappear. She was wrong on every count. The TSA agents didn't care about her designer sunglasses or her Beverly Hills connections. They cared about security, about the law, about doing their jobs correctly, and when she tried to corrupt them, they responded exactly as they should have, with immediate arrest and prosecution. No hesitation, no negotiation, just justice. Today, somewhere in a federal prison, Patricia Whitmore serves her sentence. A daily reminder of what happens when greed overcomes common sense. She shares her story with other inmates perhaps, though probably not with pride. She thinks about that morning at O'Hare, about the moment when Michael Stevens first looked at her strangely, about the feel of those heavy bottles, about the words that came out of her mouth in that screening room offering a bribe. She replays it in her mind, wondering if she could have done anything differently, if there was a moment when she could have stopped, confessed, minimized the damage. But deep down, she knows the truth. Her crimes began weeks before that morning, when she first decided that laws didn't apply to her, that she deserved special treatment, that the system was something to be exploited rather than respected. And back at O'Hare, the security checkpoints continue their endless rhythm. Bags roll through scanners. Agents watch screens with trained eyes. Travelers remove their shoes and place their bottles in clear plastic bags. The system works because people like Michael Stevens and Sarah Martinez and Thomas Wright show up every day and do their jobs with integrity and professionalism. They catch the smugglers. They refuse the bribes. They enforce the rules that keep everyone safe. They are the reason Patricia Whitmore is in prison, instead of walking free with her illegal gold. They are the reason airport security works. They are the quiet heroes who will never make headlines for simply doing what's right, but whose actions speak louder than any news story ever could. Integrity cannot be bought. Justice cannot be avoided. And karma, when it arrives at an airport security checkpoint, is swift, thorough, and absolutely unforgiving. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.